to modern church has become, in many ways, in many places, irrelevant. Why is that? You've already talked about it a bit, but I'd like you to further, like you said, the social cohesion has been lost in many communities because they have so many different options. The church isn't serving that function any longer because we've really stripped it of some of its power. But what are some of the other ways that the church has become irrelevant in our modern culture?
Become irrelevant?
Yeah, irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, here's a quote that comes from a non-Christian. He's an Australian. He's a sociologist. He studied the world global church just because he was interested in why the church in Africa and Latin America were growing so fast and why the church in Australia was shrinking so fast. And he says this. He says, the Western church has singularly failed in its one major task, and that is to pass along its foundation story to the next generation and bring it to bear on the contemporary issues of the day. That's a quote. That's a more of a paraphrase.
Who was that?
What's that?
What was his name?
His name's John Carroll.
Okay, John Carroll.
And John Carroll, I think it's called The Gnostic Jesus or something like that. I forget the exact title of the book. But the point he's making, and it's kind of a side point, but the point he's making is the church has failed to show the comprehensive scope and vision of their faith that's given in their foundation story of the Bible. But he's saying, secondly, they've failed to bring it to bear on the cultural issues of the day because they haven't had a comprehensive vision. They haven't brought it to bear on sexuality and gender, on racism, on political ideologies, on goods, on technology, on economy, on consumer life. And in so doing, they've left the churches have left the people of the church, and parents have left their kids without a way to navigate a distinctive way of living. And I think that is a critical thing that we've not, the president, I think, of Eerdmans made this comment a few years back. He said, during the time of COVID, he says, we've seen just so many people leaving the church today. And he asked, what happened? And he says, because for 30 years before, I think it's more than that, but 30 years before, we've not been discipling. It's been about attracting individuals to a certain kind of worship on Sunday morning, throwing our weight into that. We've not discipled people into the biblical story, into understanding the Western story, into living faithfully. And our failure to disciple, he said, has hollowed the church out. Then he said, when there were these three cultural pressures, he describes three cultural pressures. One's COVID, one's the Trumpist and the wokest polarization, and the other is the racist incidents that took place with Floyd. He says these three things, they came in and the church had no way of knowing how to work with these things, and it just pushed on a church that was empty, and it just imploded. That's his vision. But what that described for me is, instead of being in a place where we're able to wrestle together with what the right and the left have right and wrong about these things, we're in a place where we just started fighting. The fighting led to polarization. The polarization led to many people leaving the church, and the church was collapsed because we weren't doing the kind of in-depth, rich discipleship that we should have been doing. And so it seems to me that recapturing the importance of discipleship the way the early church did it is going to be critical for a church if it's going to take up the kind of dialogue I just described around technology. It's got to take pretty much more seriously its own faith and realize that its faith is not simply about going to church on Sunday, having a worship experience, meeting Jesus on Sunday, and then going back and allowing yourself to be shaped again by all the powerful idolatrous forces of the world and being given no means and no equipping means to be able to deal with them. I hate to say this, Travis, but I forgot what question you asked.
How has the church become irrelevant? How have the churches become irrelevant?
So again, what he was saying is we didn't have a big vision. We weren't bringing it to bear on these issues. And what was happening, we were just being absorbed into the streams and the cultural streams of the way that our humanist culture was shaping it. So we were irrelevant in speaking into that.